housekeeping. If you are tuning in live, if you can keep your mic muted and your camera off if you can, that kind of helps it flow a little better. Keeps us from getting interruptions with internet connections and stuff like that. All right, so we're ready. Romulo, are you recording now?
Yes, we're recording, so we're good to go.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome to those joining us live. As Romulo just mentioned, you can type your questions in the chat box, and we'll answer those as they come up or when we can. My name is Jeff Seiler. I am the ag agent here in Sedgwick County. I started in January of 2019, so this will be my second wheat plot tour. Unfortunately, we had to cancel our in-person wheat plot tours this year because of our pandemic restrictions. So we're not standing out in the field at 8 o'clock this morning getting soaked on with soggy donuts. But even though we couldn't be in the field, we still wanted to make sure we provided you with info on the varieties. So we put together this Zoom meeting, hoping that that will kind of take the place of our in-plot tours. Here in South Central Kansas, our wheat plots are a collaboration between multiple counties. We have agents from Harvey, Sedgwick, Harper, Sumner, and Cowley. We all work together to organize the plots, plant, package seed. So we all have the same varieties and plot layout. In our plots, we have 30 different varieties, and they are replicated 3 times. So we do get harvest data off of those. If we can raise enough money, we've been able to so far. So hopefully we can again this year and get those harvested for data. So even though we aren't doing the tours in our plots this year, they were still planted, and you are still welcome to go check them out for yourselves. And we encourage you to go check them out for yourselves. You can get plot map and locations by contacting your local county agent, or there's a link on my Sedgwick County extension page on the agriculture page on that where you can find those. I have a link to a Google Maps that will show you where all of the plots are located, all 7 of our plots. And there's also a link to our plot map. So our Harvey County agent's on, so I'll kind of let him tell you a little bit about their plot up there.
Hi, I'm Ryan Fleming. I'm from Harvey County. Our plot is located just southwest of Newton. If you guys need the specific address to it, get with me. I can get you where it's at. We've got the signs up and stuff for it. The fungicide that's on it was A-frame. It was sprayed on by a plane. Besides that, it's looking real good. Everything's growing really well. I'll go out there and mow it, and we'll harvest it, and I'll let you guys know how the varieties test out. But if you guys have more questions about it, you're welcome to contact me after this or any other way. But I'll let the next one go.
All right, thanks, Ryan. And that one was planted October 17th. Here in Sedgwick County, we have 2 wheat plots. Our Andell plot on the map there, I have it labeled as Goddard. It's off of Andell Road. It's right in between Garden Plain and Goddard. Our cooperator there is Greg Neville. That plot did not receive a fungicide, so it does have quite a bit of disease creeping into the upper canopy. Some of those flag leaves have quite a bit of disease on them. There's septoria, some tan spot. So you can really see the difference in variety resistance to some of that out there. That was planted October 17th as well. Moving south to our Clearwater plot, Doug Coles and his son Nathan help us out with this one. It was planted October 16th and did receive a fungicide treatment. So plants are, for the most part, looking pretty healthy. I was out there yesterday, and it's a decent plot. There's some septoria on the lower leaves, maybe a little bit of tan spot. I saw some stripe rust a few weeks ago. All I could find out there was what looked like some scarring from that earlier infection. There was nothing new coming out. Our Cowley County agent Kelsey is on, and I'll let her fill you in on our Southern County plots.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. And thank you to Jeff, Randy, and Ryan for their collaboration on this. This is my first year serving in this role as the ag agent, so I appreciate all their help as we both planted it, and then Randy helped me scout it quite a bit. I'll share with you about Sumner, Cowley, and Harper County plots. Our Cowley County plot is north of Ark City on 232nd Road, east of Highway 77. And if you need more specific directions, you can get a hold of me and I'll get those to you. Our cooperator is Ken Bryant. This year our plot has some volunteer wheat, so it won't be harvested for yield data. We did not apply fungicide this year, and we did find some stripe rust in moderate levels. That was as of last week. We received quite a bit more moisture since then, and so we'll see what that looks like soon. There was a little bit of tan spot in the lower to mid canopy, but the filling looks really good and the tillering looks good, and the heads look like they're going to be full heads. And then moving over to Sumner County, there's a couple plots over there. Randy Hine is the agent for Sumner County. The Caldwell plot is on the northwest edge of Caldwell, and the cooperator there is Greg Turek. The Caldwell plot had moderate to severe stripe rust in susceptible varieties, and there was some tan spot in the lower to mid canopy. Like with the Cowley County plot, the filling looks good and the tillering looks good, and the heads look like they're going to be full heads. The Belle Plaine plot is located 6 miles southeast of Belle Plaine, and the cooperator there is Doug Hiskin. There were growth issues last fall and early this spring, and they were thinking about abandoning the plot, but with the longer fill period, it has come out of those growth issues and looks like it'll be harvestable for data. The plot did receive fungicide treatment and looks to be pretty clean. There is a third test plot in Sumner County. It's located 5 miles north of Conway Springs and hosted by Tom Pauley. This is a K-State test plot with county varieties in it. And then over in Harper County, Jenny Carr is the ag agent there. The county of Harper County was the cooperator for the plot. There's not much disease, but the plot is really inconsistent due to problems during planting with the drill.
All right, thank you, Kelsey. So with us today, we have 2 of our extension specialists and 1 of our former extension specialists. Romulo Lolato is our extension wheat specialist. Kelsey Anderson is our new extension wheat pathology specialist. And Eric DeWolf, who is our former wheat pathologist and is now doing research and teaching with the university. Thank you guys for joining us. If you're ready, let's start with what you've been seeing this year and into the varieties.
Well, hello everyone. It's good to be here today. As Jeff was mentioning, this is a different aspect or a different format than what we're used to do. But we do appreciate you guys being here and whoever's not here watching this later. So we're trying to adapt to this new COVID-19 situation. So I guess before we jump in the varieties there, I will give a brief overview of what we're seeing around the state as far as wheat goes. Then probably Kelsey and Eric, they could also give a brief overview on the disease status. But the main things going on with wheat around us today or through the growing season were, first, Southwest Kansas, and by Southwest, I really mean Liberal and that part and West, extremely dry. Since last fall, they never really got much rainfall, and so many of those fields actually emerged in the spring, which already brings the potential down. Another region that is considerably behind in rainfall accumulation, or it was at least until May 20th, was North Central Kansas. So those 2 regions being extremely dry. We had that April freeze, right? April 3rd and then April 13th through the 17th with several freeze events then. And during that time, we were thinking that Central Kansas and North Central Kansas would be kind of the region that were most affected by the freeze. And today, going back and checking, really we see many fields in Central Kansas, that region around Barton County or so, even Ellsworth County, that in the low-lying regions, they got hit pretty hard, but they had moisture to recover. Now, as we go to North Central Kansas, Phillipsburg and Rooks County, that region, Smith County, the freeze was actually much harder over there, and it was very dry. And so in the end, the crop didn't recover very well until now, right? So now with this last week's rain, the crop out there should probably recover. One interesting thing from this freeze this year that we noticed was that usually the crop that is further along, it's more exposed to the freeze damage because it's in more sensitive stages of development. But this year seemed to be the other way around. The crop that was further along had a little bit more canopy, was a little bit lusher, perhaps didn't let the cold air settle in as much, and so we didn't see much. We lost some of the primary killers, but it recovered very decently. Now, the late planted crop, the very small crop, that's where they didn't have much canopy. We actually lost several killers there, and it was the crops that were feeling the most. That's in north central Kansas and northwest Kansas as well. As far as development goes, it does look like we're a little bit behind than what we would be, where we would usually be as far as the crop goes, but that's especially true for north central, northwest Kansas. It seems like this year there was a bigger difference between south central Kansas, where you guys are, and the rest of the state. Like you were a little bit above, perhaps in precipitation and in temperature, and that really helped the crop move along. So there's a big difference there in development between where you guys are and going north, especially in north central Kansas, a larger difference than we have seen in past years. Really, based on what I've seen in the state, from that region of Ellsworth, Barton, McPherson down, excuse me, it's probably the highest yield potential in the state. Hopefully this heat that we have coming up next week is not hot enough to really damage our yields and just bring a little bit of that protein up, but you guys are in very good shape. I didn't touch anything about diseases because we have a couple of disease specialists here who can give us an update.
Yeah, so this is Eric DeWolf here, and I'll start out with a few comments, and Kelsey and I will try and pass the baton back and forth here between the two of us. So a couple of the agents, Jeffrey and Kelsey and Ryan, all mentioned the disease stripe rust. And you should remember we often will have problems with stripe rust in south central Kansas, and this year appears to be no exception. And thanks to Jeff's help and some others, we were able to find stripe rust very early in the growing season, usually right around mid-April, and really high disease years we'll start to hear of problems. This year it was towards the end of April and early May. The disease is favored by cool, moist conditions, and it seems like this area of the state did have favorable conditions for the development of disease, and like Jeff and others have reported, there are some areas of south central Kansas where the disease is quite severe on the more susceptible varieties. The other news on stripe rust is that to be aware that the population of stripe rust seems to be changing and able to overcome some of the resistance that we've deployed over the years. Varieties like SY Monument, Zenda, to some extent Bob Dole, Larry, that we previously considered moderately resistant or highly resistant to the disease and are once again showing some vulnerabilities. This is particularly important for varieties that are like SY Monument, that are holding a lot of acres. In many ways, these varieties are a victim of their own success. As they get out on more and more acres, the fungus continues to adapt to overcome some of that source of genetic resistance. There's a selection process that occurs throughout the successive use of the different wheat varieties and sources of genetics. So we've been trying to keep an eye on that. We got some early reports of that, or kind of a shot over the bow, if you will, in 2019. And here in 2020, it seems like the fungus is picking up where it left off. And we are picking up considerable disease developing on some of these previously thought to be resistant varieties. It seems like the disease is very scattered, maybe much more scattered across the state than it is and has been in some other recent years. We've had major problems with stripe rust in 2017, 2019 were major stripe rust years for the state of Kansas. This year, it seems like it's a little more patchy in distribution. Central Kansas, South Central Kansas seem like right now they're some of the hot spots, still waiting to see what happens in some of the north central and western regions of the state. Many of the agents in those areas of the state are reporting that while the disease is present, it's certainly not out of control. So Remember, as Romulo had just reported, that it's been dry out in many areas of the north central to and western Kansas, and those dry conditions often hold these diseases in check. Kelsey, do you want to add a few thoughts about Fusarium head blight or head scab?
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a good update of for striped rust, and I think you hit it on the head. It's important to remember that fungal diseases really like standing water on the leaves. So if it is present, but the leaves are dry for a good amount of time, you probably won't see disease take off the same way, and it's pretty dependent on the temperature. And that wet weather has been favorable for some of the other fungal diseases like tan spot and septoria. So some of the diseases that cause either tan or brown lesions and can have some fungal bodies that can cause some yield loss if they are in the upper canopy. So you might see them start to form in the lower canopy, especially where it's nice and wet, and especially when the canopy is dense. And then if those diseases are moving to the upper canopy, that's when we can start to see some yield loss. And I think this part of the state has been a particularly hot spot for some of these fungal diseases. There's been pretty good weather for one fungal disease that we call Fusarium head blight or head scab. It really favors wet weather in that period right before flowering, in that flowering window, which we've had. And so it's important to keep an eye out. You can make a fungicide application, and that can protect the plant during that flowering window. And now it's important to scout for disease symptoms. So it gets infected during that, weed gets infected during that flowering period, and then symptoms show up 3 weeks later. So 2 or 3 weeks later, you can start to see bleaching spikes that should start in one portion of the spike, maybe in the middle part of the spike. It could start towards the top or towards the bottom, but it'll move out from a certain area. And that's a good thing to keep an eye out for, because then you'll have to consider if there's toxin accumulating in the grain. So some of these varieties that we're going to talk about today have pretty good Fusarium head blight resistance. So it's going to depend also a lot on what materials planted. Eric, did you have anything else that you wanted to
I would say excellent comments there. Maybe the final thing that I'll add here is that there are some varieties that are still holding up fairly well to stripe rust, to leaf rust, and as Kelsey mentioned, some of them have a reputation for moderate levels of resistance or intermediate reactions to Fusarium head blight. So as we go through these varieties, we'll try and highlight which of those we're concerned about, from some erosions of that genetic resistance and how the fungus is overcoming it. But we'll also try and highlight those that have a little better disease package and those that have strengths on the disease side. So hopefully you can avoid fungicide use in the future if that's a desire of yours. Jeff, what do you think? Are we ready to go into varieties?
Yep, I am if you guys are. Go ahead and move on. I think we have the Oklahoma.
Very well.
First.
Excellent. Yeah. So their South Central Kansas are actually placed in the region of the state where Oklahoma State varieties will be likely best adapted whenever we compare to other Kansas varieties. And Smith's Gold is one that we need to talk about. So if you guys remember the variety Gallagher, actually you probably do, because it has actually many acres in South Central Kansas and a pretty good yield record there as well. Smith's Gold is actually has Gallagher on its parent side, so it's kind of coming in as a replacement for Gallagher. So it does pretty well on acid soils, which is an important trait that we want in that region. It does have an improved Hessian fly and green bug resistance when compared to Gallagher. It's going to be a little bit later in heading, but what's interesting is that it's a little bit later in first hollow stem. So that means that if you're grazing, if you're in a dual purpose situation, you would be able to graze it for a little bit longer and still maintain that medium early, perhaps maturity for heading. So with that said, I do need to make here some comments on the yield performance of Smith's Gold. Whenever we look at the Oklahoma data only, it is on pair with Gallagher. So Gallagher and Smith's Gold have been performing quite similarly in Oklahoma. But as we cross the state border and come here to Kansas, we do seem to have a little advantage still to Gallagher when it comes to yield. So for example, if you look at 3 years of data, right, look at 3 years at 2017, 18, and 19, Gallagher would have been out yielding Smith's Gold in South Central Kansas there with a good 3 to 4 bushels per acre. So that's an important difference there. If we look at the amount of data, if we're looking at 3 years of data, 10 replicated trials in South Central Kansas, and we have that type of advantage of Gallagher compared to Smith's Gold. So that might be a drawback for Smith's Gold when it comes to Kansas conditions here. Eric, any comments on the disease package on Smith's Gold?
Yeah, so Smith's Gold is one of those that I feel like has been holding up fairly well over the last few years to stripe rust and leaf rust. I think we have it as kind of a moderate resistant reaction, and I think Kelsey, it's looked fairly good this year on the stripe rust. Would you agree? You were down in the Hutchinson area just a few days ago evaluating that, and I think Smith's Gold was looking okay there. What's your thought?
Yeah, and that field was pretty. The pressure was pretty high, so. You know, sometimes these ratings are dependent on how bad the pressure is in the field, but this one, Smith's Gold held up really well. It was scoring one of the lowest in the test for leaf and stripe rust. I think it does have susceptibility to fusarium head blight, if I'm not mistaken, Eric. Maybe you can comment on that. So that might be a disease weakness.
Yeah, I would say weaknesses for Smith's Gold would be fusarium head blight. It's certainly in that squarely in that susceptible category there. Another vulnerability would be on the leaf spotting diseases, where it's a little bit weak on the tan spot or septoria complex of leaf spotting diseases. So, and that's true of Gallagher and some of the ones a little bit further back in its pedigree of Duster. So there are a few things you're going to want to watch there. There are some strengths there on the rust side, which have really helped us out in both Gallagher and Smith's Gold. Want to go on? There you go.
Very well. We're having next year. So Green Hammer is a little bit newer release, also from Oklahoma State there. Green Hammer has a bullet on its pedigree, so TEM 103 and bullet on its pedigree there. Pretty good yield potential on Green Hammer. I think the biggest, so the reason it's called Green Hammer is, I believe they were talking a little bit about its leaf health, and probably Eric might be able to comment a little bit more there. But action flight tolerance on Green Hammer, good on acid soils as well. Typically a large kernel, so you might need to watch out for seeding rate there if you're planting in pounds per acre rather than seeds per acre. Last year had a very good performance in South Central Kansas. So last year, Bob Dole was across the board kind of #1 in performance in the region, South Central Kansas, North Central Oklahoma, but Green Hammer was right there, right beside it. So any comments there, Eric or Kelsey, on its leaf health?
Yeah, so Green Hammer is a fairly new one from Oklahoma State, and I don't have a lot of data to share with it of my own observations. We're just starting to get our own observations as we gain more experience with this variety. Like Romulo mentioned, it looks like Green Hammer does have some resistance to offer on the stripe rust, leaf rust side of things, maybe a little bit more intermediate on the leaf spotting diseases as well. So I think this is one to keep an eye on, and let's see how the resistance package holds up in the future.
Yeah, I'd agree. Just looking at it in the stripe rust nursery, it looked good, but it's always better to have more data, more locations, and more years to really make a recommendation on this variety. But so far, looking good for some of our rust diseases.
Doublestop CL Plus. So these CL Plus means a clear field variety with 2 genes. That means that you can go with the high rate of yield and throw some methylated seed oil in the mix there, really heat it up and get some good control of those grassy weeds. Probably it's probably the best clear field variety that we have available for that region, for South Central Kansas. Very strong yield record. It can get a little bit tall, but it does have a decent straw strength. It might lean a little bit there, but just because of its height, right? So that can be a little bit of a concern, but maybe the maturity also is a little bit on the late side. So overall, a very good yield record. If you're needing to clean some of those grassy weeds, that one that I would have on my short list there. Excellent on acid soils. We've seen it in some very, very low pH where it's actually performing very well. But it is just a tiny bit tall and a tiny bit on the late side for maturity there. But again, on my short list as a clear field variety. Remember that you need to buy seed every year. It's a certified seed only variety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like Doublestop. We've seen this variety for a number of years now, and it seems like it's performed quite well in that South Central area. So I would agree with Romulo. I would say for a 2-gene clear field, this has been a pretty solid variety for South Central Kansas. On the disease side of things, maybe it's been a little interesting, and over the years, as we've seen Doublestop, many times it had kind of an intermediate reaction on a number of different diseases, and some of that's because of what we call genetic segregation, or kind of a mixed reaction, or individual plants that look fairly resistant, and some right next to it might be more susceptible. So when we kind of merge those all together, we end up with some intermediate type of reactions. Because it's a certified seed only type of variety, it seems like the breeders and certified seed agencies out of Oklahoma have been able to do some reselections and release this variety in a little more pure state here. So it seems like this is one where we've seen some improvements in the disease reaction. Doublestop is one that looks like it has some adult plant type of resistance. So once we get to the heading and flowering stages of growth, or early stages of grain fill like you're at right now, we do see the resistance to stripe rust, leaf rust seem to improve as the plant matures. Again, kind of intermediate to the septoria leaf spotting and susceptible to fusarium head blight. So, again, some strengths on the rust side, pretty good 2-gene clear field wheat variety for you to consider down in the South Central region.
Yeah, I totally agree with Eric there. And from what we've seen, it looks like it's holding up well to stripe rust and leaf rust. Does have that vulnerability to head blight, so something that you'll have to think about in this part of the state. You might just have to understand it would potentially need to be protected with a fungicide if that risk is there. And then it does have some susceptibility to barley yellow dwarf and some virus susceptibility there. So just another thing to consider in that big, nice agronomic package that it has overall, but a couple of vulnerabilities.
Okay, we have Gallagher here. So Gallagher has been around for a little bit longer than some of these other ones, perhaps not when compared to Doublestop, but definitely when compared to Smith and Green. So a little older one, but variety that has gained thousands of acres in South Central Kansas. Actually, one of the most widely planted varieties out there where you guys are. And really, whenever we look at its yield record, it makes sense. It does have a very good yield record. If you look at the last 3 years of data, and that includes several trials combined, Gallagher still shows up towards the top yielding group there. So very strong performance. Part of that is because of its good acid soil tolerance that it has. It has a passion fly tolerance, allows you to plant a little bit early if you are in those dual purpose systems. It has duster on the background, so it does have a pretty good amount of forage production, but it is on the early side for a first hollow stem. So it will require probably terminating grazing maybe a few days earlier than its replacement, that is Smith's Gold there. So again, I think it's still a good option, still a strong option. The replacement has not beaten Gallagher in as far as yield record goes in Kansas so far. What about its disease package, guys?
Yeah, I would say on the disease side, Gallagher's maybe not quite as strong on some of the leaf spotting diseases. It looks like this particular picture is showing a lot of leaf damage, which could be somewhat related to its maturity, but also could be some of that septoria or tan spot vulnerability that we've sometimes seen in Gallagher. Also keep an eye on that Fusarium head blight. This is one that's going to be quite vulnerable there. So planting Gallagher following corn in a no-till production system could be a high risk kind of situation. Barley yellow dwarf like Gallagher. Gallagher like Smith's gold and does have some intermediate resistance to barley yellow dwarf that can help us out in some of those areas of South Central that are more prone to that viral disease. Kelsey, what have you been seeing on the rest side of things down in the South Central region as you've been there on Gallagher?
Yeah, I think you put all the good rest varieties first in these plots. Is that intentional here? So, so this is, yeah, another one that's been performing pretty well. I mean, there is sporulation on this variety, so it's not 100% resistance. So you will see some stripe rust or leaf rust if it's in the area. But overall, it's one of the more resistant varieties we've been seeing. So that's the good news here. But of course, this picture illustrates that there can be some leaf spotting problems. So that can cause some yield loss. So another thing to balance in with the decision if you're going to plant Gallagher.
Okay.
Okay, have our next variety here, still within the OSU lineup, Showdown. So Showdown, it's a variety that coming out of the Oklahoma program, the breeder, Brett Carver, thinks it has a better adaptability, perhaps a little bit wider adaptability, allowing it to go a little bit further north than what we're used to see these varieties from Oklahoma. So I think part of that is because of its a little bit later maturity. So it's more on that medium late side on the maturity. It does have a okay rising in its pedigree and some pro experimentals there. Pretty good passion fly on Showdown here. Good acid soil tolerance here as well. Decent drought tolerance. So we've seen this one as okay 1, 2, 7, 16. So I think we've seen it for a couple of years now as okay 1, 2, 7, 16. It does get tall and it can lean a little bit. So I mean, straw strength is not going to be excellent on this one. It can lean a little bit there, and its forage production is not necessarily the best, right? So probably I don't know if I would put this one as a grazing variety unless you're really cranking up your seeding rates there. And Eric, if I remember right, I think Showdown has some susceptibilities on the leaf rust side.
Yeah, let me take a quick glance here. Yeah, it does look like it does. So this is one that looks like it's at least intermediate to leaf rust and some of the information we have from OSU on it. Kelsey, what did you see on the stripe rust? If our memory serves me right, it's not too bad for stripe rust.
Yeah, it was intermediate compared to the others that were in the test. So, you know, if we were looking at 1 being completely clean, no stripe rust, and 9 being really high stripe rust, totally smoked plant, this would be maybe a 4 or 5, so somewhere in the middle. Now, in Oklahoma State, does say that this does have some resistance. So again, that might be you might be part of that shift we're seeing. So maybe there is some resistance to some of the stripe rust races, but there might be a bit of a shift happening that might knock this one down. So something to watch for, I think, for Showdown, and we need to get some more data in our performance trials to really understand that.
Yeah, I think the other maybe where there is some improvement over Gallagher with Showdown would be on the leaf spotting reaction. Appears to be a little bit better, and you can see that some in the picture here. There's a lot more green leaf area than what we were seeing in Gallagher with the plot just before this one.
Okay, well, sorry, Jeff had already changed. I don't know where. So, our next variety here, LCS Valiant. I believe that's how it's said. So, new Lima grain variety. This variety was a collaboration with University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So that tells you more or less the adaptation of it. Now they are putting it as widely adapted throughout the central corridor of Kansas there, right? But I always like to look where these varieties are coming from and kind of gives you an idea of the type of region where there might be more adapted on the long run here. So as far as the agronomics on LCS Valiant goes, it does have a pretty good winter hardiness. We would expect that coming from the program in Nebraska there. The frost protection fly as well. Good yield stability. Now, one trait that might be a concern in South Central about LCS Valiant is the low pH, right? So acid soils, it's not going to perform very well. And that might be a concern in many of the pH that we have in South Central Kansas that very often can get to those levels below 5.5. So. But in the end, it does seem to have a good yield potential. So, I mean, I think we need to see a little bit more, see how far south this one is going to go. And I don't think it's going to go much far east, maybe because of its powdery mildew type of susceptible profile that it has there. Eric, Kelsey, any comments?
Yeah, so this is another one where we just don't have a lot of our own observations yet, so we have to rely on what Lima Grain has been saying about it. They do report that it does have a considerable vulnerability to powdery mildew. And when we've had other varieties historically that have had a high degree of vulnerability there, we do see them sometimes struggle when we get them into Harper County, Sumner County, over into Cowley County. So some areas of South Central can really have a more powdery mildew problems or a history with it. We may see Valiant struggle in parts of South Central because of that powdery mildew vulnerability. They're also reporting that some intermediate levels of susceptibility from their past observations on rust. Kelsey, do you have any observations to share from some of your recent observations?
I muted myself, sorry. So I know Lima Grain does report, like you said, that they are that they have an intermediate reaction to stripe rust. So that's what we saw in our field here for stripe rust, a little better for leaf rust. And then there's some intermediate vulnerability reported by Lima Grain to Fusarium head blight. So this is one of those varieties, at least in my opinion, that has some fungal disease vulnerability. So if it is planted for some of the agronomic traits, it might need a protective fungicide just to help it along. So that's just something to consider based on the data we have. It'll be good, again, to see this one for multiple years here in Kansas.
Yeah, I think kind of an interesting variety, one to keep an eye on, but it does seem like it has multiple vulnerabilities or partial vulnerabilities that we'll want to keep an eye on as we get some more experience with Valiant.
Okay, so we have a few varieties now that will be on that coaxium group of varieties. That's what the AX in the end indicates here. So remember that we talked about Doublestop being a clear field variety. So that clear field technology makes that variety resistance beyond herbicide, which is an AOS inhibitor type of herbicide. Now this here, which has the coaxium technology, makes that variety resistant to aggressor herbicide, which is a ACCase type inhibitor herbicide. So the aggressor will control grassy weeds as well. The beyond will control grassy weeds and broadleaves, so that's a big difference there. But this is a newer technology that is coming out in a lot of varieties, and we are excited with it because it gives an option for herbicide rotation, and that's especially important as we get to South Central Kansas and into Oklahoma, where we might have problems with farrow rye and other grassy weeds there. It's important to rotate the herbicide. But again, any of these technologies, they're going to be certified seed only, meaning that you need to buy seed every year. About the Atomic AX, and right here, I need to admit that I have seen these varieties a very limited amount of times. So this is a new technology that these varieties are just coming up now. So as Eric mentioned, we need to rely a little bit on information that is coming out from Lima Grain and from others as well before we have all the data from our own. But as far as Atomic AX, they are putting it as a variety more adapted to South Central Kansas through North Central Oklahoma and West Kansas and Northwest Oklahoma Panhandle. That will be the main area of adaptation of Atomic AX. It's an early maturing variety. I think it has a decent soil pH and a decent drought tolerance there, so that could help its adaptation there in the south state. Decent stability, but does have some time into planting. It looks like, and so if you're planting late, probably there might be better options to ensure that you have enough feeders out there. As you can see there, it's a medium height. It's not very tall compared to the neighboring varieties there. So those are some of the comments about Atomic AX. And again, let's keep an eye and see what we can learn from these coaxium varieties in the coming season.
Romeo, do you have any information from Lima Grain directly on the disease package for LCS Atomic? This is a brand new one for me. Just looking at this picture, it doesn't look like leaf health is real robust compared to other varieties in the plot here that we've seen. But I thought
yeah. So actually,
information.
Maybe Kelsey, you have. I have a few comments, but Kelsey can.
Yeah, no, you can jump in too. I was just going to say they report it's pretty susceptible to all three rusts, stem rust, stripe rust, and leaf rust, also fusarium head blight, and powdery mildew, so, and tan spot. So, you know, sometimes a good variety has to sacrifice some of that disease resistance for some other good traits. So it's one of those I think we need to take some more data on, and it'll be interesting to see it some more this year, and maybe we can get some notes on these varieties too. But I think if they're reporting that it's weak on some of these diseases, I tend to believe that. I don't know, Romulo, do you have any other comments? Sorry to jump in on you there.
No, it's all good. Again, as I mentioned, it's not one that I've seen too much. So we as of now, rely on their information. So. Okay, coming up next, we have another one of these coaxium varieties, LCS Fusion AX. So this one, I think we've seen it last year already, and if I'm not mistaken, this variety would have more of a Colorado type of background, so a bird on its background and hatcher as well. So to me, it does make it more adapted to have Western Kansas and into Colorado there. So very good drought tolerance on this one. It does seem to have a long coleoptile, which for those conditions are pretty good. Now I don't think straw strength is the best on this one. And I think milling and baking test weight is also kind of towards the low side there. But I think we're a little bit outside of the area of adaptation for Fusion AX in South Central Kansas.
Yeah, on the disease side of things, I think LCS Fusion, like Kelsey had just said, is quite vulnerable to, like LCS Atomic, is quite vulnerable to a lot of different leaf diseases. So I'm a little bit concerned about how well this would be adapted for South Central Kansas because of disease susceptibility. Kelsey, do you have any firsthand experience with this one yet?
I don't think we have seen it. I don't have a note here, so, or I may have seen it and not taken a note, but that would be my same comment. Looking at some of the data that they provide, really be careful of planting this one in some of these high disease areas like this part of Kansas.
Okay, well, being from Brazil, sometimes they're making it difficult for me to come to say these names out loud. So LCS Helix, maybe? Is that how we read it? Helix AX?
I think you got it.
So another new one, right? I've seen it this year for the first time, and I've not seen it before this year. Limagrain is putting this one as the most wide adaptability, so the wider adaptability out of the coaxium varieties that are available. So it's one to perhaps be taking a look on here, the LCS Helix AX. Again, remembering of the certified seed only issue, right? You cannot save seed from these varieties. Helix is a medium early variety. It does seem to have decent soil pH and drought tolerance based on the information from Limagrain. Again, medium height. Again, you can compare it to the two varieties on its side, and it does seem to be a little bit shorter than the other ones. Good straw strength on this one. Eric does have soil-borne mosaic tolerance, so I think this makes it a little bit more adapted here to the central part of the state. And based on their notes, again, it seems to do well on stem rust and head scab, but not on tribe rust or leaf rust, at least based on their notes. But I don't know, have you guys seen this one out much?
I have not. This would be one of the first times I've seen it, certainly as a name variety. It is interesting that you mentioned the susceptibility to soil-borne mosaic. Historically, that's been a very important disease in the state that's largely been controlled through genetic resistance in the central portion of the state. So occasionally we'll see varieties that are maybe better adapted for western Kansas, Colorado, parts of Nebraska where that disease isn't very common, be entered into variety performance tests or brought into this region. And I would just caution you that that's probably not a path you want to go down there, that varieties with that vulnerability tend to be very inconsistent in central Kansas. So I would say—
Eric, just a comment. I think it's actually tolerant to the soil-borne. Sorry if I said vulnerable.
Great,
yeah.
great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so that's a big plus for Helix to have that resistance there. So
I've seen reported stem rust and stripe rust resistance too, and some leaf rust resistance, and fusarium head blight resistance. So I think we need to think a little bit more about this and see it for a couple more years, but it might have a good disease package according to Limagrain. Is that the same thing you're seeing, Homelo?
Yeah, again, I have not seen much of these yet, but it's been the first one this year. So,
yeah, one of the things to caution about the variety ratings that companies will give is that sometimes they are tested against maybe one particular strain of a pathogen, maybe in greenhouse conditions. So they might not totally always reflect the pressure locally in Kansas or in the region that we're planting. So it's important that we get a couple of years of data of local conditions on some of these varieties before we can absolutely say something is resistant or susceptible. I don't know if you have a comment on that, Eric, but I just thought I'd toss that in.
yeah, sometimes our ratings don't necessarily agree, particularly as a variety is right out of the just released and named in the first time we see it in the plot. So it's not uncommon for us to have limited data as a variety is right at its release point, and as we gain confidence with it, usually within a year or two, we can fill in a lot of those gaps or address any uncertainties there. So, yeah, good comment.
okay, we have LCS Chrome now. LCS Chrome has been around for a little bit longer. We have a good yield record, and we have a no Chrome. Really, so the thing about Chrome, it does have an excellent standability, right? It does have a great straw strength, and that helps it not lodge. And nobody really likes to harvest with so that's a big plus for Chrome. It does have a good drought tolerance as well, and seems to do well on acid soil, so that gives it a broad adaptability. What I'm usually concerned with Chrome in South Central Kansas is the maturity. It is towards the medium late side of maturity. That means that it can get on the heat more often than not. Now, with that said, its yield record, if we look at last year, it was excellent. It was towards the highest yielding varieties, right there with Green Hammer and with Bob Dole in South Central Kansas and North Central Oklahoma. But last year was actually a year that favored these longer maturing varieties. If you look at 2 years in a row, now 2018, which was very dry, and 2019, Chrome was also there. So Chrome also did quite well. So with that said, what I would suggest is Chrome could be an option on the late maturing side, but I would not put all my eggs in one basket, right? I would definitely make sure that you have that maturity spread out. If you get a year that turns out to be just extremely hot, it's late enough that it might hurt more than other varieties. Chrome accumulates a pretty good amount of protein, and that's kind of we usually say protein is inversely related to yield, but in the case of Chrome, it does accumulate a good amount of protein. We have a study there that what happens is that it's more nitrogen during grain fill than some of the other varieties. So if we compare WB grain field that has a very good yield record, it will take about 25% of its nitrogen, or about 15% of its nitrogen during grain field, period. And Chrome will take more like 25%. So that really goes up to its protein. So it does have a good protein content. Eric and Kelsey.
Yeah, on the LCS Chrome, there's a lot of things that I like about Chrome. I feel like it does have some resistance to the tan spot septoria complex of leaf spotting diseases that I think has really helped Chrome out in some years. It does have some resistance to leaf rust, I believe. This is one where we feel like the stripe rust reaction may be changing. So Lima Grain still considers this one resistant. I would maybe downgrade its resistance just a little bit here to maybe put it into the moderate resistant or even intermediate category. A place where I disagree with Lima Grain is on the barley yellow dwarf side. They seem to feel like it has maybe more resistance than many varieties, where I feel it's probably pretty squarely in the average to maybe even slightly below average. So I think there's some vulnerability to some of those viral diseases that you're going to want to watch in LCS Chrome. Kelsey, do you have any additional observations to share?
Not much to add. That sums it up really well. Same. We've seen this several times, looking pretty good, although we do have that concern with the stripe rust reaction changing a little bit. So in that test we have in this part of the state in South Central Kansas, it was rating just intermediate. So we had a pretty good amount of stripe rust on this variety, which suggests that that resistance isn't holding up. So that's something to take a look at. Nothing else to add there.
Okay, AM Cartright. So AM would stand for Agrimax there. So you might have seen AM Eastwood, which was their first hard red winter wheat, and now we have AM Cartright. So actually, AM Cartright, it's originally on the breeding line within Kansas State University, and then it was licensed out to Agrimax. So Cartright, it does share a parent with Bob Dole. So we're talking quite a bit about Bob Dole here, how he performed well last year in the region. So Cartright shares a parent with Bob Dole there. Pretty good quality on Cartright, a very good straw strength, as you can see there in the picture. Very decent on acid soils as well. Although it shares a parent with Bob Dole, it's not keeping up with the yield as much, right? At least based on K-State data. But it is very similar yield performance to what we have in SY Monument. So it didn't keep up with Bob Dole as much as in the last year, but it does keep up there with Monument most years. In that 2018 year, with that drop we had, it seemed that it lost a little bit more dealers than what we would like to see. But on the other hand, with this latest freeze that we had, it seemed to hold as well as some of the other varieties in the same maturity, if not. So again, not much there on drought, but a good amount of I mean, has a good freeze tolerance there. Now again, we don't rate for that very often, but just observationally, like this seemed like it did well. You can see it's quite a bit shorter than what we have in bottle.
Yeah, being a fairly new variety, I don't have a lot of my own observations on AM Cartright, but I know it's gone through some of the nurseries for the rust diseases. Kelsey, have you had a chance to get some fresh ratings for Cartright?
Yep, so I have here as performing intermediate to stripe rust. So that's the one we have a bigger set of data for from this year. So reactions intermediate. There were some lesions on the upper leaves, so we give it around a 4 or a 5 out of 9, 9 being the worst, 1 being the best. So something to consider. I don't have much data here on the other disease traits. For example, fusarium head blight. I don't know. Do you know about that, Eric?
I don't know exactly where it's going to fall. I'd have to see if we can dig out some of its experimental line information to see if we can find out a little bit more about what its history is.
Coming up next here, we have a AG icon. So AG standing for Mexico. Again, another variety that was licensed from K-State here. AG icon is like a sister to LCS Chrome that we have been talking about a couple of varieties ago. It is a bit earlier than the Chrome, though, because it does head out probably 3 or 4 days earlier than Chrome. Pretty good strong trend on icon here. I don't think that it has the same drought tolerance that we see in Chrome, but a pretty good acid soil tolerance here in icon as well. So again, straw strength being probably in that medium type of maturity, and being a sister to Chrome, probably the major comments that I have. Eric, have you seen much of icon as far as disease reaction goes?
Yeah, I don't feel like icon is maybe quite as strong as what we've come to expect out of Chrome over the years with on the disease side of things. I think this is another one where we've seen steady erosion of some of the stripe rust, leaf rust type of vulnerability there that maybe Kelsey has some fresh observations on too. Do you have any observations from this year to share, Kelsey?
Yeah, so we have this performing worse than average, so 6 out of 9 for stripe rust in some of our newer nurseries. A little better for leaf rust, which is what the variety is. It says it will be. That's what it's advertised as, resistant to leaf rust, and we see that a little bit this year. I think we know it has a bit of a vulnerability to head scab, to fusarium head blight, and I think maybe you've seen that over the years. Are there any other vulnerabilities this one has?
Well, I think that pretty well covers it. Maybe the last thing would just be watch the BYD on it. So I think overall icon has one to take a look at here, but it's maybe not the strongest one to consider for this area of the state.
Okay, coming up here, Rockstar, next variety. This variety is licensed to Polanski seed. The Z1, I think we saw it first time last year as still kind of like a experimental, and now this year we're actually seeing it with the name Rockstar. Rockstar is going to be adapted to that central part of the state, right, central Kansas, and it will go down all the way to north central Oklahoma as well. It's somewhat genetically similar to Best Buy Monument, although it's going to be a couple inches shorter than what we have in Monument. and probably just a notch earlier than what we have in Monument as well. Apparently an improvement in straw strength, a little bit better straw strength than Monument there, medium maturity, and a good acid soil tolerance. Eric, if I've seen right, Eric and Kelsey, did the Rockstar hold well with the stripe rust change?
I think so. Kelsey, what are some of your recent observations suggesting there?
Yeah, so what we have here is that it's performing well. So it better than average, better than a lot of the varieties that we've seen. I think in a few of the observations that we've made, so that's really promising for stripe rust in this part of the state. I think that's particularly important. We'll have to see. I'm trying to dig up some Fusarium head blight notes, and I just don't know if we have them. So I think we probably have this in our performance trial this year, so in our rating trials for Fusarium head blight in the nursery. So it'll be exciting to see how this one shakes out in that test.
Paradise. So Paradise is another variety that has been licensed again to Polanski seed. So these two big Polanski varieties. Actually has a pretty good yield record. If we look at the last 3 years in a row, right, and that would actually involve a total of 10 replicated trials between 2017, 18, and 19 in South Central Kansas. It was just a couple of bushels behind Gallagher. So it's right there with that top yielding group, right, together with Zenda and Bob Dole. So it might be another option there as well. It does have this look that to me kind of looks like a 4458 head pipe on it. So there's a lot of kernels in a given spike there. It is a medium early maturity. Again, has a decent yield record, pretty good end use quality, a little bit large seed as well. And as far as disease ratings go, Kelsey, I believe it is on the susceptible side to head scab based on what I've seen, but I'll let you and Eric talk about the disease side on it.
So I think that's true. Eric, would you agree? For head scab, and I think also for leaf rust, which is another one of our concerns here. Is that consistent with what you've seen historically, Eric?
Yeah, it sure is. I think Paradise has been hurt pretty bad by Fusarium head blight in a lot of areas of the state over the last couple of years. So I think that this is one we'd want to be careful of if we were going to put it after corn or into corn residues. I think it could really get hurt in that type of situation. It's one of the places where we have some question marks on Paradise yet is in some of its barley yellow dwarf reactions and some of the reaction to leaf spotting diseases. So it looks like if we can make an on-site visit to this plot, we may be able to get some of those gaps filled in. I'm seeing a lot of brown leaves in this particular image, and I'm not quite sure if that's related to maturity or if we are seeing above average vulnerability to septoria or other leaf spotting diseases.
Okay, we're getting now into some of the K-State wheat varieties here. The first one being Everest. I don't think Everest needs much introduction to the crowd there in South Central Kansas, right? Has been around for several years now, I believe since 2009, and for many years was the variety with the most acres planted in Kansas. So several reasons for that, of course. Some of the things that make it well adapted to the region from an agronomic perspective, at least. It's an early maturing variety, and so many of the years it will escape that heat towards the end. Very good straw strength, very good standability there, very good on acid soils as well. So those things from an agronomic standpoint really made Everest a good variety. We will talk about Zenda here in a little bit, which is a replacement for Everest. And the reason I'm bringing it up now is just because looking at yield record in South Central Kansas, Zenda has out-yielded Everest for the last 3 years consistently. And so If you're still planting Everest, there are good reasons to plant Everest, but I think these reasons go up to Zenda as well with a better yield potential there. So probably one that we should be moving away from these to Zenda if that has been a good variety for you. But Eric, many of the things that made Everest successful were related to its disease package.
I think so. Everest really got us through some rough years for barley yellow dwarf and fusarium head blight. Everest has been extremely popular in the south central, southeast portions that are more of the state that are more prone or have a historical risk for diseases like fusarium head blight, where it's some of the best available genetic resistance. Barley yellow dwarf, it's also above average, moderately resistant there. And so those have been some real strengths of Everest over the years. Leaf rust is still hanging in there pretty well on Everest as I've observations and powdery mildew. So there's a lot of things that have made Everest strong. Probably where it has a vulnerability is on the stripe rust side of things. When Everest was first coming out, it really looked great to stripe rust, but as variety became more and more successful, the stripe rust did adapt eventually to Everest and to Armor at that time, which were very popular varieties in 2012. So I think this is one that we still has a place in many areas because of some of those disease strengths, but there may be some things on the yield potential wise like Zenda that can bring forward some of the desirable characteristics and maybe give us a little higher end yield potential as well. Romulo, maybe did you mention anything about Everest's quality over the years? Maybe there's some issues with grain quality that we had some concerns about.
Yeah, no, I have not mentioned that. So usually the quality on Everest is it is below some of the other varieties out there. So it's really on that threshold many years of what would be acceptable for a bread wheat. And that's another thing that was improved in Zenda. So the quality in Zenda is nothing necessarily to brag about, but it's better than Everest, and it's bringing up the profile of quality in the state as well. So Jeff, I believe Zenda is the one that comes next.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was through the first range, and we are halfway through. So don't forget, you can use the chat to ask questions. I have had several come in. I know you guys are on limited time. Do you want to address one or two of those now, or wait till the end?
So if we're halfway through the varieties, we probably need to hurry up, or
Okay.
maybe we need to not discuss some of the varieties that perhaps are not very well adapted to that region.
Okay.
So we might have to skip a few just to make sure that we cover the most important ones. But we could entertain questions as well. I mean, it's really however you want to go about it.
I would say go ahead and take a couple questions, and maybe we'll regroup a little bit and hit that second range of varieties with a little quicker turnaround.
Okay, and this one was about onset fungicide. The farmer used onset this year, and he wanted to know if that was okay to use or if he should be using something else. I think he sprayed, and then he had some stripe rust show up after he sprayed. Maybe it's possible that leaves were already infected and they showed up. The symptoms started showing up after, so he just wanted to know about onset.
Yeah, so onset is a generic version of a older fungicide called Folicare. The active ingredient there is tebuconazole, and it seems like a lot of growers have had really good success with onset. So as far as our data would suggest, it's still a reasonable strategy or a regional product to consider using, particularly for rust control. Like Jeff mentioned, sometimes we'll see situations where stripe rust had already caused infections on the leaves, and even though we go ahead and treat with a fungicide, it does shut the activity of the fungus down. We lose a lot of that yellow or orange reproduction of the stripe rust fungus. But the damage is already done. Those damaged cells, damaged portions of the leaves do continue to decline because of the pre-existing infections that were present at the time of infection. So it's sometimes, I can explain it as there's a little bit of a momentum that the disease has that we don't necessarily stop, and it's frozen, as is the day we applied the fungicide. It takes a little time for it to act, and sometimes the lesions that were already active will continue to, those areas of the leaf will go ahead and continue to decline.
One thing I'll toss in about tebuconazole is that compared to some of the other triazole fungicides, and Eric, you can jump in too, it has a pretty quick drop off in residual life. So after 7 to 14 days, you really don't have much fungicide left in that plant. So if we do have these later rust spores moving in, you can have increased infection just because of the timing window of that fungicide application. So some of the products that combine tebuconazole with another fungicide have extended life because those other fungicides just have a longer residual life. I just thought I'd toss in that note.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kelsey.
Okay, one more quick question. There was a comment about fields not having rye for 2 years, and then all of a sudden this year they showed up with a bunch of rye. How long can those rye seeds be viable out in the soil? Or were they moved in from somewhere else?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer for that one. Yeah, I would expect if it was clean, that would not have, for a couple of years, that would not have come back, because I think they tend to emerge relatively quickly if they have the conditions. Just, I don't think they have much of a dormancy period on it. I mean, even wheat just have maybe, once it's ready and good to go, it might have a few days or a couple of weeks or a little bit more of a dormancy period before it is ready to emerge. So I think I would be surprised if it was clean, but I mean completely clean for a couple of years, and then it came back. Eric or Kelsey, would you guys have any opinions there?
Yeah, it certainly seems like within a few years, it seems like if there was rye present, a lot of the seed viability would decrease over time fairly rapidly. So either there's a possibility that maybe it wasn't as clean as we thought, or there's a possibility that, like the questions suggest, that it was either brought in with some seed or contaminations from other situations or other scenarios that were happening on that site. So it's a little hard to know for sure what happened there, but probably the way forward is to double down on your efforts to get control of the rye in this particular field again, so it doesn't get out of control. Best ways to do that is probably through crop rotation, which opens up different herbicide options for you.
Okay, thanks, guys. We'll go ahead and move on with the varieties. If you want to skip one, just let me know. I'm going to shut off my camera, so hoping that helps the feed out a little better. We've had a little jumpiness, so.
Okay, well, we'll try and go a little bit quicker through these as well, so we make it through. But Zenda, we kind of already talked about when we were discussing Everest. It is Everest replacement. It has been yielding very well in South Central Kansas. Consistently in the last 3 years, 10 replicated trials, about 4 up to 5 bushels better than Everest there. So again, if you're planting Everest, probably time to take a closer look at Zenda. A few important differences agronomically there. It's going to be a little bit taller than what you're used to in Everest, but with a better straw strength, right? So you're not going to see it lodging anymore. It's still going to have a very good standability. And a little bit later than what we have in Everest as well. Again, continues with that good acid soil tolerance, so that should not be a concern, in the same about pH range that Everest had there, and perhaps with some differences there in the disease package, right, Eric?
I think so. So we feel like Zenda does bring forward a lot of the resistance to Fusarium head blight and barley yellow dwarf. Maybe not quite as good on barley yellow dwarf as what we come to expect out of Everest. So keep a lookout for that potential vulnerability. Kelsey, I feel like the stripe rust is beginning to change a little bit in Zenda. Or historically, we felt like Zenda was on the at least moderately resistant to resistant. But what are some of your more recent observations there?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a shift to a moderately susceptible variety. So when we're looking at it in tests, it's pretty intermediate. So that's something to consider, that there might still be some resistance there, but it's definitely intermediate, and you can see infection that could be yield damaging. So that's important to consider. Leaf rust, I think it's still performing well, unless you have data otherwise. Eric.
So maybe not quite as good as Everest has been, but I think it's still a very useful level of resistance to leaf rust.
Larry is another one that was released at the same time that Zenda was. So these would have been 2 or 3 years ago, no, not more than that. 2 recent varieties here. Larry is going to be a little bit more drought tolerant than what we have in Zenda, so it allows it to go a little bit west within that region where you guys are. Very good drought tolerance there. It's going to be a little bit better straw strength than what we have in Zenda, a little bit taller than what we have in Zenda as well. Maybe just a notch later. So if we consider Everest as an early one, Zenda as a medium early, Larry is going to be on that medium category as far as maturity goes, but still very good standability, overall good agronomic performance. Whenever we just look at the yield records in Larry, it has not been the greatest in the region, and the reason for that, I believe it has to do with the fact of not fungiciding our trials. Eric, that makes sense?
It does, and I think one of the key vulnerabilities of Larry has been leaf rust. Right from its release time, we did know that leaf rust susceptibility was there, and we've definitely seen Larry get hurt at some locations that were untreated with a fungicide with that vulnerability to leaf rust. This is another one that I feel like has an emerging vulnerability to stripe rust. Maybe not quite as vulnerable as some others just yet, but I think that's something we're going to watch on Larry going forward. Also keep in mind that Larry doesn't have the same level of genetic resistance to Fusarium head blight, so I probably would not plant this one into the corn residues. And if your cropping system requires that, I'd probably take a look at Zenda and the K-State lineup or some of the others that we may talk about in a moment.
Nothing to add from me. That's what I was going to say.
Kansas Western Star, Jeff, maybe this might be one that we can skip. I mean, we're very excited with this one. I think it's going to be an excellent option, but it has bird on its background, and it's going to be more of a Western adapted variety. Although it does have soil-borne, so I mean, it could come east, but I believe that we're focusing more this one out west. A couple of experimentals I think we can skip as well. So Kansas Venata might be an interesting one for us to talk about. It is a white wheat, and as a white wheat that is actually more geared towards central Kansas. So it will go out western Kansas as well, but it does have an improved pre-harvest sprout tolerance. So for those growers in south central Kansas, north central Oklahoma who have where to deliver white wheat, Kansas Venata might be an option. It does have a decent yield record in the region, good straw strength on Venata, good baking quality as well. And again, maturity might be a little bit on the medium late side, intermediate there on acid soils and intermediate on drought tolerance. But the yield record has been okay, and it is a white wheat variety option for central Kansas. Compared to other white wheats, it has been a little bit higher yielding than others in central Kansas.
Yeah, it might be an interesting variety here. I think a couple question marks that I had as we're just gaining some experience with it was its leaf spotting type of reaction maybe looks a little like it does have some vulnerability there at this particular location. But Kelsey, do you have any observations from this year on the stripe rust, leaf rust for KS Venata yet?
I don't on KS Venata. I know that there's some documentation that says it's resistant to some of that has a better reaction to some of the rusts, leaf rust, stripe rust, stem rust, but I'm not seeing any data from our observations this year, so we need to validate some of that.
Yeah, some interesting kind of question marks to try and fill in.
Mm-hmm.
Kansas Silverado is another white one out of K-State Hayes breeding program. It is another one that has a decent level of pre-harvest sprout in there. So the area of adaptation for Silverado will be central and going to western Kansas, so probably a little bit better drought tolerance than what we have in Venata. So it would allow it to move west a little bit better. It's a medium short variety, medium early, so the maturity might be a little bit better adapted to the south central part of the state there. Again, pretty good test weight and milling and baiting as well.
Yeah, Kelsey, do you have any documentation to pick up on Silverado?
Just looking in my notes here. So we did test this for stripe rust this year, and it did not perform as many of the others in the test. So that's just something to keep in mind as a vulnerability. And I'm not, I think we are testing it this year for Fusarium head blight. So it will be interesting to see some of that information shake out in a couple of weeks here. Do you have anything else to add there? No, I think that's all.
Okay, SY Monument. So Monument, most widely wheat planted around the state. It does have several strengths, a couple weaknesses that we need to be looking at there as well. First, talking about the yield record in South Central Kansas. Last year, it was not shining out there. It was kind of towards a little bit above the middle of the pack. But if we look at a couple of years in a row, when we had that dry year in 2018, Monument did do quite well. It was towards the highest yielding varieties there in South Central Kansas. So overall, although last year was not exceptional for it, it does have a pretty good yield record in South Central Kansas. Very good acid soil tolerance here in Monument. The maturity on it might be a little bit later than what I would like there in South Central Kansas, but again, talking about spreading our risk through different maturities, Monument is one option for us to keep in mind for that late maturity group. It is very high tillering variety, so many growers like it after soybeans because it still tillers quite a bit and still gets up and going despite those late planting. So if you're following soybean, Monument might be a good one. So again, for the late maturing variety, a good option. Now, Eric, probably need to be taking a little bit more care on the disease package for Monument here.
I think so. I think this is one where last year we really began to see some erosion in its stripe rust resistance. So the stripe rust population does appear to be adapting to Monument. Like Romulo mentioned, it is a really popular variety right now. It holds a lot of acres, particularly after on ground that's planted to wheat after soybeans. So it's done well over the years in that type of production system. We've seen some erosions on both the stripe rust and the leaf rust this last year. So I think on Monument going forward, that's something we're going to watch. Maybe Fusarium head blight is what hurt it last year. We had some problems with that in some areas of central Kansas, and this variety does have some considerable vulnerability, at least moderately susceptible to the Fusarium head blight. Not too bad on the leaf spotting diseases, kind of moderately resistant to intermediate there. So still some value in Monument. If it's one that's working for you, I think it still has some merit to stay with it, but let's keep an eye on some of those rust diseases.
Nothing to add to that.
Okay, Bob Dole, we've been talking about this one since the beginning there. And so Bob Dole is really one that I think in South Central Kansas would be a good one to have on the short list. I mean, we have looked at its yield record in the region for the last 3 years already. And last year it had an exceptional performance. 2 years in a row, it stores the top again, and 3 years in a row, it stores the top again. So definitely one that I would have on my short list for that part of the state. It does have some fuller on the background, some overlay on the background as well. It's a very good yield potential, good on acid soils, which is good there for that region. It is a little bit tall, right? It can be quite tall actually, so it can lean quite a bit. So it's going to be taller than your average variety for this region. Very good head size. I mean, if you can see in those pictures, it's a very typical from these varieties, just to have some very, very large heads. And it also has some large seeds. So just watch out for planting pounds per acre. Those large seeds will result in less seeds per acre. So you might want to bump those seeding rates up a little bit just to make sure that you have enough population out there. Exceptional quality as well. So this one, if you have the opportunity to market it on the quality, there might be a few extra, well, another way to make a little bit more profit out of the crop as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things that I like about Bob Dole. I think its stripe rust, leaf rust historically has been really strong. This is another one I feel like the stripe rust is sort of resistance is eroding a little bit there. What do you think on its fusarium head blight reaction, Kelsey? What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so from what I know, it's not performing as well as some others on fusarium head blights. It does have susceptibility there. And like you mentioned, in our tests, stripe rust has been a little worse than average. So that's really something to consider with this one. And then a couple of the other things like, for example, barley yellow dwarf, I think it's a little bit susceptible. So if it has some good agronomic traits, it's just important to look out for some of these disease vulnerabilities, at least in what I've seen so far.
That's why Wolverine. So I think we saw this one first time last year. So new release out of Syngenta. This is a SY Wolf by Everest cross, and I think it has another variety on its background as well. But it's again, Everest and Wolf were very different varieties, so we're kind of like interested to see how this one is going to turn out. Pretty good standability based on what we've seen so far. Very good straw strength there. The issue with Wolverine in South Central Kansas might be acid soils. So if you have low soil pH, that's not one to use, because unfortunately the soil pH tolerance from this one came from Wolf and not from Everest, and Wolf is susceptible to acid soils. Any thoughts on the leaf spotting or the leaf diseases on this one, guys?
So I think the main story here is probably on the susceptibility to stripe rust. Kelsey, what are some of your observations there?
Yeah, so leaning towards the worst side of the test here, I think it's pretty susceptible, highly susceptible to stripe rust. So that's a big red flag for this variety. A little better for leaf rust, I think. So that's something to consider in depending on the pressure in your area.
Yeah, one of the strengths of Wolf over the years has been resistance to leaf spotting diseases. So I was kind of curious whether Wolverine would bring some of that forward. Probably at this particular location, it maybe has enough rust damage there that it's going to be hard to sort that out just based on the picture. But yeah, let's see where this one goes. It'd be something that if we were going to look at it at all here, it would probably require a fungicide.
That's why I achieve CL2. I'll probably keep this one a little bit short. It is a 2-gene clear field variety that is adapted to the region. So central, south central, southeast Kansas there and into Oklahoma. Maybe my concern here, it doesn't have much on hash and fly, and in that region that can be a pretty important problem. But also, perhaps more importantly, the yield performance of it has not really been stellar. It has always been in the middle of the pack. So if you look at the last year, 2 years in a row, or 3 years in a row, SY Achieve has always been in that middle of the pack, so I have not been extremely excited with it. But as a 2-gene clear field variety, it's probably the only option that we have on the early maturity, right? So if you're thinking of your cropping system, you need to control your weeds, and you need to go for a summer crop later, and you want it to be harvested 7 days earlier than your double stop, for example, SY Achieve might be an option that fits that need, or being an earlier variety with a 2-gene clear field.
Yeah, Kelsey, do you have any observations from this year to share on SY Achieve?
I don't. So I know that at least the documentation I have says that it has some resistance to stripe rust, but I'm not seeing that it was in some of our tests this year. So that'll be a good thing to dig into a little bit more. And then it has a susceptibility to fusarium head blight. So that's something to just consider for this one.
Okay, WB 4269. So 4269 is a relatively newer Westbred release. Let's remember that the second number there, the 2, it refers to the variety maturity. And so 2 meaning that it will be an earlier maturing variety. 4269 has a decent yield record. If we look last year, it was above the average towards that higher yielding group in our trials. Perhaps one of the things that is advantageous of 4269 would be the head cap tolerance that Eric and Kelsey might talk to us a little bit about here. Pretty good on straw strength as well. So I guess, Eric, we're seeing more and more options to follow corn, and these might be one of them.
I think so. I think in this area of the state, sometimes we tend to prefer these.
Eric, I think
Is this been the only option?
Did we lose Eric, or did I drop out?
I think we lost Eric for a little bit.
Am I back now?
Yeah, we might need you to rewind to the start.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's funny how Zoom works that way sometimes. So yeah, 4269 does have some intermediate levels of resistance. Years and years, Everest that have been really the only option, particularly in planting into corn residue. But this early maturing variety from Westbred might be an option now as we have more tools coming forward with that moderate level of resistance to fusarium head blight. Kelsey, how did this one look in some of the stripe rust, leaf rust nurseries you've been looking at this last week?
Sorry, I was muted. We conflict a little bit with Westbred's ratings here. So we did see some stripe rust accumulate. And so we would say that that's around an intermediate reaction, whereas they might say it's a little bit lower. Again, it might depend on the particular pathogens that they've tested with in their screens. So again, something to be aware of. And then there is pretty good resistance, we believe, still to leaf rust. So that's good news for this variety.
$46.99, so another Westbred variety. You can see based on the number 6 there that this is going to be of a medium late maturity as compared to the medium early maturity. It seems like Westbred has been working considerably on the variety's standability. So this one is another one that stands quite well, has a very good straw strength there. It holds its dormancy later after during the winter, so it's going to be released a little bit later after the winter there. So that probably, if you are in a situation that you're grazing, can give you a few more days after grazing there. But perhaps this is another option for after corn. At least that's what Westbred is putting this one as, and adaptability from about I-35 and east. So definitely not a Western variety here. Eric, Kelsey, have you guys seen much on head scab on this one?
I've not had a chance to see it a whole lot just yet in our own tests, but I I was aware of that Westbred does feel like this is one that they feel maybe even stronger than their 4269 that we just looked at a moment ago. So, you know, this picture makes the leaf health, overall leaf disease package look pretty good. It is a little later maturing, so those leaves haven't had as much exposure to the disease, but this picture looks promising.
Yeah, and I would say that this is one that looks like it's good to intermediate for most things across the board. So generally an intermediate disease package. So that's good to have multiple diseases with pretty good resistance, especially for some of the regions this would be grown.
$45.15. So this one is a variety with a more restricted area of adaptation. Again, that southeast Kansas probably and eastern Oklahoma there. The main thing that they're selling on this one is really the grain quality. So if you're able to get a good, like an additional price or something for your grain quality there, this might be one to be explored. Seem to have a good barley yellow dwarf tolerance on 45-15 here. This is straw strength. It's a medium short and medium to medium late maturity, as you see on the 45 on that 5 gives it a medium maturity. So guys, one thing that concerns me a little bit here, though we're talking about quality and an eastern variety, is that it doesn't offer much on head scab.
No, it's an admitted vulnerability here. Oh, sorry, Eric, I interrupted.
Oh no, you go ahead. That's just what I was going to echo too, is that it does look like it has that vulnerability. So a variety that Westbred would like to see grown in the south central, southeast portion of the state. I am a little concerned about that vulnerability to head scab. I think, Kelsey, there's also some vulnerabilities on the stem rust, leaf rust side of things. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably intermediate for those, not as bad as stripe rust, and then intermediate for some of the foliar diseases like powdery mildew and tan spot. So just something to keep in mind for this one. Might be better with fungicide in certain weather conditions.
So I guess this is our last one here, WB4303. Medium early maturing variety, as we see on that tree. Excellent straw strength on this one. If you're really wanting to push yields, this one that will handle pretty good level of fertility because it does have an excellent straw strength. In South Central Kansas, it had a very, very good year in 2017. Then 2018, which was very dry, it didn't do as well. So this is one that it produces a lot of feeders, but it slaughters off many feeders as well. So that 2017 year didn't really allow it to shine. Sorry, the 2018 year to shine as much in South Central Kansas. And then last year it was towards that middle of the pack as well. As we went south to Oklahoma, it seemed to do better, and it came back up to the top yielding group there. So performance-wise, it has been a little bit variable. I would probably use these in those very intensive management systems. So if you're really wanting to push your yields and see some good yield potential out of variety, 4303 will be able to give you those yield potentials, but you might need to work with fertility and fungicide on that variety.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is another one that has intermediate to moderate susceptible reactions to a lot of the leaf diseases, Fusarium head blight vulnerabilities. So I would agree with Romulo. Probably its best fits is in a intensive wheat management where you can take advantage of that yield potential and straw strength, but plan on using that fungicide as part of your program.
Nothing to add here.
Okay, so we made it through all the varieties. So thank you to Kelsey, Eric, and Romulo for taking all this time and going through those varieties with us and sharing all your knowledge. Do you guys have time for questions if there are any?
Yes, we can take a couple questions there, sure.
Okay, one question we had in the chat was, did you guys see a lot of fungicide treatments this spring? I know I talked to another agent who was saying that he talked to a lot of guys who were choosing to forego those fungicide treatments just because they didn't think the prices were going to be good?
I guess I can make a quick comment there. I did see less airplanes going out than I have seen in past years, especially if we compare to 2016, which was just like field after field getting fungicide treatment, and 2017 as well. With that said, we have travel restrictions, so I'm traveling less, and I don't know if I've been out as much as been in past years. But that's my 2 cents there. Maybe Eric and Kelsey could expand on that.
Yeah, I think I would echo that. I would tend to agree. Many of the growers that I've talked to over the course of the last few weeks that have been considering fungicides or county agents around the state seem to be indicating that the people are really concerned about their wheat budgets overall, and the risk of disease being a little bit later and maybe slower to develop in some areas of the state seem to have interest in fungicides declining a little bit this year. So be interesting to see as we have the opportunity to travel around and to visit with more and more growers here participating in these programs, if we can get some additional feedback there.
Yeah, we definitely need more feedback. We've had some limited ability to kind of observe the state, so it'll be good to have some conversations after the season here. And I think like Romulo and Eric said, that the economic trade-off of applying that input sometimes isn't there, especially after a freeze damage. If that yield potential comes down, that yield increase that you would gain from a fungicide just might not be there. So you have to do the math a little bit. And I think sometimes that the economics weren't there this year, and that's okay. So that's okay. So it'll be interesting to hear more.
Okay, thank you guys. And that's all I have. So unless you guys have anything to add, I think we're all through here. Thank you to our growers and all the ag agents that were a part of the wheat plots as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.